My name is Elias Moore. I am 12 years old, and the last thing my mother handed me before she left for Europe was a wrinkled $20 bill that smelled faintly like her perfume. She pressed it into my palm like it was some kind of medal. A reward. You're old enough now, she said brightly, already half turned toward the door. Independent. Just order food if you need it. Then she smiled, kissed my forehead too quickly, and dragged her suitcase down the hall as if she were late for something important. Because she was. Just not for me. The front door shut with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. I stood there in the quiet, staring at the money in my hand. $20. That was the plan. No babysitter, no neighbor check-ins, no list on the fridge, no phone call promised at night. Just a bill and a word she liked to use when it was convenient. Independent. I'll be fine, I said out loud, testing how the words sounded in an empty house. They didn't sound convincing. My voice came back to me too clearly, like the walls were listening. My fingers were shaking, so I shoved the bill into my pocket and walked into the kitchen, forcing myself not to run after her. If she thought I could handle this, then I would. I told myself that again and again, like a dare I wasn't allowed to lose. I opened the pantry first. A couple of cans I didn't recognize. A box of cereal that felt suspiciously light. Some crackers crushed to dust. The fridge wasn't much better, half a carton of milk. A few leftovers shoved to the back, condiments lining the shelves like they were pretending to be food. I did the math in my head without meaning to. Days. Meals. Portions. I pushed the fear down hard. Day one didn't count. Day one was just adjustment. I tried to make it feel normal. I turned on the TV for background noise. I lined up what food there was like I was preparing for inspection. I even smiled at myself in the microwave door. Like this was some kind of challenge show and I was the kid contestant everyone underestimated. 12 years old, independent, I could win this. 10 minutes later, reality tapped me on the shoulder. My stomach growled, sharp and impatient. I pulled out my phone and opened a food delivery app, feeling oddly proud of myself for remembering my mom's instructions. I entered the card information she had tossed on the counter that morning, the shiny emergency credit card she'd waved like proof that she had thought this through. The screen loaded. Then it declined. I tried again. Declined. Another app. Declined. That was when I realized I didn't know the PIM. I didn't even know if the card worked. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, phone in my hand, and laughed once. It came out wrong, too loud, too thin, so it was just me and the $20. Fine, I could make that work. Survivors stretch things, I had seen that on TV. That night, I made a sandwich with bread sliced so thin it was almost transparent. I spread peanut butter carefully, like it was paint I couldn't waste. I ate slowly, counting bites, telling myself it was smart, not sad. Before bed, I walked through the house and turned off all the lights, pausing in the doorway of my mom's room. Her bed was made perfectly, like she hadn't rushed out at all, like she had all the time in the world. On the second day, the house felt bigger, louder in its silence. Every creak sounded like a question. I tried to distract myself with games, with shows I didn't care about, with anything that made time move faster. I checked my phone too often. Half expecting a message asking if I'd eaten, if I was okay. There was nothing. By the third day, the joke I'd been telling myself stopped being funny. My head felt light when I stood up too fast. I found a notebook in my backpack and opened it without really knowing why. On the first page, I wrote one word in big letters: evidence. I stared at it for a long time. Then I added a line underneath: left alone at 12:20 other, no food plan, no check-ins. Something shifted when I wrote that down. If they thought I was old enough to be alone, then I was old enough to remember. To record. To make sure this didn't disappear, just because it made someone uncomfortable. That night, I opened the camera on my phone and pointed it at my face. I looked smaller than I expected. Day 3, I said quietly. I'm still alone, I swallowed. If anyone ever sees this, it means someone finally noticed. I saved the video and locked my phone, my heart pounding. Part of me hoped no one ever would. Another part of me already knew this was the beginning of something my mother would never be able to undo. By the fourth day, hunger stopped being a feeling and started being a schedule. It told me when to wake up and when to sleep. It followed me from room to room like a shadow I couldn't shake. I learned quickly that being hungry wasn't just about an empty stomach. It made everything slower. Thoughts took longer to line up. Sounds felt sharper, like the house was turning its volume up, just to remind me I was alone in it. I checked the pantry again even though I already knew what was there. The same cans. The same cereal box that now felt like it was mocking me. I shook it, listening to the faint rattle, and poured the last of it into a bowl without milk. I counted the pieces before I ate them. I didn't mean to at first, it just happened. 23. That was what was left. I chewed slowly, forcing myself to swallow each bite before taking the next, as if that could make it last longer. The $20 was folded and unfolded so many times, it was starting to tear at the corners. I kept it in my pocket like a lucky charm, touching it whenever my chest tightened. I walked to the corner store on the 5th day, the sun too bright, my legs feeling heavier than they should. I stood in the aisle for a long time, comparing prices like I was an adult with a budget instead of a kid trying not to panic. Bread or noodles? Peanut butter or canned soup? I put things back 3 times before I finally paid. When I left, my hands were full, but my pocket was empty. The $20 was gone. Back home, I lined up my groceries on the counter and wrote everything down in my notebook. What I bought. How much it cost. How long it should last if I was careful. Underneath, I added another line. Day 5. Still no call. Still no text. Writing it made my chest feel tight, but it also made me feel steady, like I was building something piece by piece, even if I didn't know what it was yet. The days blurred together after that. I learned which parts of the house were coldest, which rooms made my stomach hurt less. I stopped turning the TV on as much because the cheerful voices felt fake, like they belonged to another world I wasn't part of anymore. When I did turn it on, I left it low, just enough to remind myself that people existed somewhere. On the 6th day, I tried to open one of the cans with a knife, because I couldn't find the can opener. I cut my finger and watched the blood bathe up, bright against my skin. I wrapped it in paper towel and sat down at the table, staring at it until my vision blurred. If something really bad happened to me, I thought, how long would it take for anyone to notice? That question stayed with me longer than the pain. I opened my notebook again and added another sentence. If I disappear, this proves it wasn't my fault. The words looked strange on the page, too big for someone my age, but I didn't cross them out. I knew exactly what I meant. I started recording more after that, short clips. Nothing dramatic, just facts. The empty shelves. The fridge with more space than food. My face in the bathroom mirror, a little paler every day. Day 6. I whispered in one video. I'm dizzy when I stand up. I saved them all, labeling them carefully, like files instead of memories. I thought about texting my friend Noah more than once. My thumb hovered over his name, my mind racing through what I would say. That my mom had left me. That I was hungry. That I was scared. Every version sounded like begging. Instead, I sent a normal message. How's your summer going? When he didn't reply, I told myself he was busy. I told myself a lot of things. By the 7th day, my body felt weak, but something else was getting stronger. Anger. It settled in my chest, heavy and hot, pushing back against the fog in my head. I stood at the front window and watched other families move through their lives. Kids laughing on bikes. Parents calling them in for dinner. Ordinary things that suddenly felt unfair. You chose this, I whispered to the empty driveway. You chose to leave. Saying it out loud made it feel real. Made it feel less like something that was happening to me, and more like something someone had done. That was when the doorbell rang. I froze, cereal crumbs still on my fingers. Nobody ever rang our doorbell. Not really. It rang again, louder this time, followed by a knock that felt too serious to ignore. My heart hammered as I walked toward the door, every step heavy. Part of me wanted to stay quiet, to pretend I wasn't home. Pretending had worked so far. But another thought cut through the fear, sharp and clear. If this was someone noticing, really noticing, did I want to hide? I reached for the handle, my hand shaking. If you were 12 hungry and completely alone, would you open the door and risk everything changing? Or would you keep counting crumbs and hoping no one ever asked questions you couldn't answer. The door didn't open right away. I stood there with my hand on the knob, breathing shallow, listening to my own heartbeat thunder in my ears. Whoever was outside shifted their weight, shoes scraping lightly against the porch. That sound made the decision for me. I wasn't invisible anymore, whether I wanted to be or not. I pulled the door open just enough to see who it was. A man stood on the porch wearing a green jacket, with my school's emblem stitched onto the chest. It took a second for my brain to place him without a classroom behind him. Mr. Allen, the school counselor. He smiled gently when he saw me, but the smile faded almost immediately, like he was already noticing things he hadn't expected to see. "Hey, Elias," he said. "I've been trying to reach your parents. Mind if I come in for a minute?" My first instinct was to lie, to say they were out, to say everything was fine. I'd been practicing that instinct my whole life, but the word evidence flashed through my mind like a warning sign. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Okay," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. He walked inside and paused, his eyes moving slowly over the kitchen. The empty counter, the bare fruit bowl, the sink with dishes I'd been reusing, because I didn't want to waste soap. The silence thickened around us. "Are your parents at work?" he asked carefully. "They're in Europe," I said. The words came out flat like they'd been waiting. "For a month." His eyebrows lifted. "A month." He hesitated. "And who's staying with you?" I looked down at the floor. This was the line. The moment where everything could snap back into place if I chose to protect them. My fingers curled into my sleeve. "Just me?" I said. "They said I was old enough." Something in his face changed, not anger, something sharper. He pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for me to sit across from him. "How long have you been alone?" "Elias. Almost a week. Do you have enough food?" I let out a short laugh that didn't feel like it belonged to me. "Not really." "Money." $20. It's gone." I hesitated, then added, "They left a card. But it doesn't work." He was quiet for a long moment, like he was weighing each word before letting it exist. "This isn't okay," he said finally. "Do you know that?" My shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "They said they needed a break, that I'm mature." "Mature doesn't mean safe," he said softly. "What you're describing is neglect." The word landed hard. Neglect. It sounded like something from a textbook or a news story, not my kitchen. My chest tightened. "What happens if someone finds out?" I asked. "There are procedures," he said carefully. "Agencies get involved. Your parents would have to answer some serious questions." "Answer for it." The phrase echoed in my head. I thought about my notebook sitting open on the counter, the neat lines of ink, the videos saved on my phone. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something. "I've been writing things down," I said quietly. "And recording." He followed my gaze to the notebook. "Why?" "So no one can say it didn't happen," I replied. "So they can't say I'm exaggerating," he nodded slowly. That was smart. The word surprised me. Smart, not dramatic, not difficult. Smart. It settled into me like a brick placed carefully into a wall. "Do you want help?" he asked. "Real help. The kind that makes sure you're safe." I thought about the house at night. About counting cereal pieces. About pretending not to be scared. I thought about my parents' last message, a photo of a cafe table with a caption about freedom. "Yes," I said. Then, because the thought had been growing all week, I added, "But I want them to see what they did." He didn't argue. "Then we do this the right way." He stepped into the hallway to make a call, speaking in a low, controlled voice. I caught pieces of it, alone. 12 years old, no guardian, limited food. My pulse raced, but underneath the fear was something new. Focus. While he talked, I opened my notebook and added another entry. Day 7. An adult finally came. The words looked different from the others, heavier, like a turning point. A knock came at the door, softer this time. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair stepped in when Mr. Allen opened it. "This is Mrs. Parker," he said. "Your neighbor." Her gaze swept over me, taking in everything I hadn't said out loud.
"Oh, Elias,"
she murmured. "Why didn't you come to me?" "I didn't want to be weak." I blurted. She shook her head. Asking for help isn't weakness. It's how you survive long enough to be heard. That sentence stuck with me. Survive long enough to be heard. They sat with me at the table, not talking over me, not rushing. When they asked questions, I answered them, not with excuses. With facts, dates, numbers, what I ate, when I slept, when my parents last called. Each answer felt like placing another piece on the board. When Mr. Allen finished his calls, he looked at me seriously. "People are going to check on this?" he said. "That means your parents will be contacted." I nodded. "That's okay. Because somewhere between the hunger and the writing, between fear and evidence, I had stopped thinking like a kid waiting to be rescued. I was thinking like a witness. And witnesses don't hide the truth. The house didn't feel like mine anymore once the words were out in the open alone. Neglect, agencies. Those ideas hung in the air, heavier than the silence I'd been living with all week. I sat at the table while Mr. Allen spoke on the phone again, his voice calm but firm, like he was building a bridge I hadn't known I needed. Mrs. Parker stayed beside me, close enough that I could feel her presence without her crowding me. For the first time since my parents left, I wasn't bracing myself against the quiet by myself. Another knock came at the door. Not sharp, not rushed, controlled. The kind of knock that carried weight. My stomach twisted, but I didn't move this time. Mr. Allen went to the door and opened it. A woman stepped inside, professional but gentle, a folder tucked under her arm. She introduced herself as Ms. Ramirez from Child Services. Her eyes moved through the room the same way Mr. Allen's had earlier, taking in what wasn't there as much as what was. The fridge door was still closed, but it might as well have been open. The emptiness had a presence now. She crouched slightly so we were closer to eye level. "Hi, Elias," she said. "I'm here to make sure you're safe, safe." The word felt unfamiliar, like a coat that didn't quite fit yet. She asked questions slowly, giving me time to answer. How long had my parents been gone? Who was checking on me? Did I have food, money? Did I know how to reach them? I answered honestly, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. When I mentioned the $20 and the card that didn't work, she wrote something down without comment. When I told her the last message I'd received was a picture of a cafe table in Paris, her pen paused for just a second before moving again. "Do you have any proof of what you're telling me?" she asked gently. I nodded and slid my notebook across the table. She flipped through it carefully, page by page, reading the dates, the notes about meals, the lines I'd written when I was dizzy and scared. Then I pulled out my phone and showed her the videos. She watched them all without interrupting, her expression changing in small, serious ways. When she finished, she looked at me for a long moment. "Thank you for documenting this," she said. That took courage. Courage. Another word I wasn't used to hearing about myself. She stood and spoke quietly with Mr. Allen and Mrs. Parker, using words like immediate placement and welfare check. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough. Things were moving. Too fast to undo. "Elias," Ms. Ramirez said, turning back to me. "For tonight, we don't want you to be alone again. Parker has agreed to have you stay with her while we contact your parents and figure out next steps. Is that okay with you?" I thought about the house at night. About listening for sounds that never came. About waking up hungry and pretending it was fine. Then I thought about what it would mean for my parents to find an empty house when they came back. An empty house and a file waiting for them. "Yes," I said. "I want to stay somewhere I'm not invisible." Mrs. Parker's hand rested gently on my shoulder, solid and warm. "You'll be safe with me," she said. Before we left, Miss said. Ramirez asked if she could take photos of the kitchen and pantry. I watched as she opened the fridge, her face tightening just slightly. She photographed the shelves, the empty containers, the unused credit card on the counter. Each click of her phone felt final, like a door closing behind me. While they talked, I opened my camera app again. I filmed the fridge, the table, the folder resting on the chair. This is what our house looked like when someone finally came. I whispered into the phone. This is what they'll see when they get back. I saved the video and slipped the phone into my pocket. Packing didn't take long. a backpack with clothes, my notebook, my phone charger. I stood in my room for a moment, looking at the posters on the wall, the bed I'd slept in alone all week. "This is what you left," I murmured, imagining my parents standing there later. "But it's not what you're getting back." Walking next door felt like crossing a line drawn in chalk, and then etched in stone. Mrs. Parker's house smelled like soap and dinner. Real dinner. My stomach growled loudly, and I felt my face heat up. "We'll fix that first," she said kindly. "Come on." We went back to my kitchen together with grocery bags, filling the counter with food that actually belonged there. Pasta, sauce, bread, fruit, things that lasted. Alan watched quietly, then nodded toward my notebook. "Keep the receipts," he said. "They matter." So I tucked them between the pages labeled evidence. As water boiled and garlic sizzled, the house filled with a sound I hadn't realized I missed. Care, normalcy. While we cooked, Miss Ramirez asked more questions. Times, dates, messages. I showed her everything. When she asked if I wanted to write a statement for my parents to read, my answer came without hesitation. "Yes," I said. "I want them to know exactly what this felt like." That night, eating warm food at a table, where someone noticed if I stopped chewing, I understood something important. The knock on the door hadn't just changed my situation. It had changed the balance. I wasn't a kid waiting quietly in an empty house anymore. I was a story that had been heard. The next morning felt unreal, like I had woken up inside someone else's life. Mrs. Parker was already in the kitchen, humming softly as she cooked eggs. The smell alone made my stomach twist in a way that wasn't painful this time. She noticed immediately. "Sit," she said gently, sliding a plate toward me like it was the most normal thing in the world. No questions. No lectures. Just food. I ate slowly, not because I had to ration anymore, but because part of me didn't trust that it was real. My body was still catching up to the idea that there would be another meal after this one. Across the table, my notebook sat open, receipts tucked between pages. Evidence. It wasn't just a word anymore. It was becoming a record other adults were building around me. Later that morning, Ms. Ramirez returned with another woman I hadn't met before, someone older, sharper, introduced as her supervisor. They sat at the table with folders and tablets, their presence calm but unmistakably serious. Mr. Allen joined us, his school badge clipped neatly to his shirt, grounding me in the idea that this wasn't just happening in my house. It mattered outside of it too. "We're going to ask you to tell your story again," the supervisor said kindly. "We know you've already told it, but consistency is important. Take your time." So I did. I talked about the suitcase rolling toward the door, the $20, the word independent. I talked about the credit card that didn't work and the silence that followed. I told them what I ate, how I counted, how I wrote things down because I didn't want to forget how it felt. No one interrupted me. No one tried to soften it. They listened like my words carried weight. When I finished, the supervisor nodded. "You did the right thing by documenting," she said. "This helps us make sure no one can rewrite your experience." Rewrite? That was what I'd been afraid of from the beginning. Someone smiling and explaining it away, until it didn't look so bad anymore. They asked to see my parents' messages. I handed over my phone, watching as screenshots were taken of timestamps and photos, a cafe table, a museum selfie, a caption about finally being free. The supervisor's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "Do you want to say anything directly to your parents?" Ms. Ramirez asked. "We can include a statement from you in our report." My throat closed for a second. Then I felt the edge of my notebook under my hand, solid and familiar. "Yes," I said. "I want them to see it." They gave me space at the table while I wrote. The words came faster than I expected, like they'd been waiting. I wrote about being hungry and scared. About pretending I was fine, because I thought that was what being mature meant. About counting crumbs while they posted photos of food I couldn't have. I didn't yell on the page. I didn't insult them. I didn't have to. The truth was sharper than anything else I could have used. When I finished, I slid the paper across the table. "Please don't let them say I'm exaggerating," I said quietly. "They won't," the supervisor replied. "Not with this." That afternoon, Ms. Ramirez took me back to my house to collect more things. Walking in felt strange, like stepping into a museum exhibit of my own life. The air was stale. The fridge still mostly empty. She photographed everything again, slower this time, methodical. Each image felt like a marker being placed. While she worked, I set my phone on the counter and recorded another video. "This is what it looks like after a week alone," I said softly. "This is the house they left." I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The emptiness spoke for itself. That evening, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized instantly. My mother's work phone. My chest tightened, but Mrs. Parker was right there. "You don't have to answer alone," she said calmly. I put it on speaker. "What is going on?" my mother demanded, not bothering to hide her anger. "Why is there someone from Child Services emailing me? Do you have any idea how this looks? Not are you okay? Not are you safe? They're involved because you left me," I said. My voice shook, but it held. "You left me alone with no food and no way to buy more." "You're exaggerating," she snapped. "There was food. And you're 12, not a baby. I can't believe you'd turn people against us like this." Mrs. Parker leaned forward. "This isn't about turning anyone against you," she said evenly. "It's about safety. Your child was hungry." Silence crackled on the line. Then my mother spoke again, colder now. "We'll talk when we get back, and there will be consequences for this." The word hit me like a bell. Consequences. She'd used it my whole life, a warning that ended every argument. "I know," I said quietly. "You taught me that." The call ended abruptly. Mrs. Parker reached over and silenced the phone before it could ring again. "She's right about one thing," she said softly. "There will be consequences. Just not the ones she expected." The next day, Miss Ramirez pulled me out of school and told me my parents were coming home early. 3 days instead of 3 weeks. Not for me, I realized. For themselves. "We'll meet them at the house," she said. "You don't have to be there if you don't want to." I pictured them walking into the kitchen alone, finding nothing but quiet and questions. Then I pictured them seeing me, standing there with proof in my hands. "I want to be there," I said. "I want them to see." And for the first time, no one tried to talk me out of it. The morning my parents were supposed to return, the house felt like it was holding its breath. We arrived early, before their flight landed, and stepped inside together like we were setting a stage. Ms. Ramirez placed a thick folder on the kitchen table. Her supervisor sat across from it, calm and unreadable. Alan leaned against the counter, hands folded, watching quietly. Mrs. Parker stood near the doorway, close enough that I could feel her presence without turning around. My notebook lay open beside the folder, the first page visible. Evidence. My phone rested next to it, screen lit. The video from day 3 paused on my face, tired, smaller, staring back at me like a warning from the past. "Are you sure you want that playing?" Ms. Ramirez asked gently. "Yes," I said. "They always say stories don't matter without proof." She nodded and didn't argue. We heard the car before we saw it. Tires on gravel, a door slamming, laughter. My legs felt weak, but I stayed where I was. The front door opened, and my mother walked in first, dragging her suitcase behind her, just like she had when she left. Sunglasses pushed up on her head, her smile froze the second she took in the room. "What is this?" she demanded. "Why are there strangers in my kitchen?" Her eyes landed on me last. Her supervisor stood. "Mrs. Moore, Mr. Moore, my name is Karen Whitfield from Child Protective Services. Please have a seat." My father tried to laugh it off, setting his bags down. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. "Our son is very mature. We trusted him. You trusted me to survive," I said quietly. "Not to be taken care of." My mother turned on me sharply. "Elias, what did you tell them?" "The truth," I said. My voice didn't waver the way I expected it to. The supervisor slid a paper across the table. "This is the activation record for the credit card you left. It was never set up with a PIN. It was declined multiple times." Another page followed. "These are photographs of your refrigerator and pantry 1 week into your trip." My mother's face drained of color. "Expired food doesn't mean he was starving," she snapped. Mrs. Parker stepped forward. "He was dizzy from hunger when we found him," she said. He didn't come to me because he was afraid of disappointing you. My father's jaw tightened. We told him to order food. And when the card didn't work, Mr. Allen asked calmly. Silence. Ms. Ramirez nodded toward my phone. Elias, are you comfortable showing them what you recorded? My hands shook slightly as I tapped the screen, the room filled with my own voice from days earlier. Day 3, I'm still alone. The video panned across the empty kitchen. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. No, she whispered. No, this can't be happening. But it was. The supervisor folded her hands. Based on our investigation, leaving a 12-year-old unsupervised under these conditions qualifies as neglect under state law. Effective immediately, there will be an emergency order. Elias will not be returning to unsupervised care with either of you until a full hearing is conducted. My mother stood abruptly. You can't take my child from me over a misunderstanding? We needed a break. Do you know how hard we work? I took a step forward before I could stop myself. You tell everyone how hard you work, I said. But when I was alone and hungry, you didn't tell anyone that. Her eyes filled with tears. We didn't mean to hurt you. You still did, I said. And you taught me that actions have consequences. The room went quiet. My father gripped the back of a chair like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The supervisor slid another document forward. Elias will remain in temporary placement with Mrs. Parker. You will be notified of the court date. Until then, contact must go through our office. My mother looked at me, desperation breaking through her anger. Please, she said. Tell them you want to come home. I thought about the nights alone, about counting crumbs, about recording videos in the dark. I want to be safe, I said. Right now, that isn't here. We left before they did. As I stepped outside, I heard my mother sobbing, my father murmuring words that sounded thin and useless. Walking back next door, my chest felt heavy and light at the same time. They hadn't come home early for me. They'd come home to face what they'd left behind. The hearing didn't feel like the dramatic courtroom scenes you see on TV. There were no raised voices, no sudden confessions. Just a quiet room that smelled like old carpet and paper, where adults talked carefully about my life, as if it were something fragile laid out on a table between them. I sat beside Mrs. Parker, my feet not quite touching the floor, my notebook resting on my lap like a shield. Across the room, my parents looked smaller than I remembered. My mother kept smoothing the sleeve of her jacket, over and over. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight. For the first time, they weren't in control of the story. The judge listened while the caseworker spoke about risk factors and supervision. Words that sounded clinical but carried weight. My videos were played. Not all of them, just enough. My voice echoed in the room, calm and factual, describing hunger and silence. I watched my parents' faces as they heard it again, surrounded now by strangers who couldn't be charmed or rushed. When it was my turn to speak, my heart hammered, but my voice stayed steady. I talked about being left alone, about the $20, about believing that needing help meant I was failing. I didn't cry. I didn't accuse. I just told the truth the way I'd written it down. The judge nodded slowly. You did the right thing by speaking up, she said. Then she turned to my parents. Parenting requires presence, not assumptions. The decision came quietly, supervised visits only, mandatory counseling, parenting classes, no unsupervised custody for now, not a punishment meant to destroy them, but a boundary they couldn't cross without changing. My mother cried. My father put an arm around her, though he looked lost. I felt a tug in my chest, grief for what I'd wanted them to be. But it didn't outweigh the relief. Life settled into a strange new rhythm after that. I stayed with Mrs. Parker, whose house had become a place where I didn't have to earn my right to exist. Mornings meant breakfast. Evenings meant someone asking how my day went and actually waiting for the answer. At school, teachers checked in without hovering. Mr. Allen smiled at me in the hall like we shared a secret about survival. My parents sent messages through the caseworker. Long ones. Apologies tangled with explanations. Promises to change. I read them all but didn't answer right away. For the first time, I didn't feel rushed to fix their feelings. Supervised visits were awkward. A small room with toys I was too old for and chairs arranged to keep everyone in view. My mother tried too hard, her voice bright and brittle. My father apologized quietly, eyes down. I listened. I believed some of it. I didn't promise anything. After one visit, my mother asked, "Do you hate us?" I thought about it carefully. "No," I said. "But I don't trust you yet." The truth landed between us, heavy but honest. That summer, I learned things I hadn't planned on learning. How to cook meals that didn't come from boxes. How to ask for help without apologizing. How to sleep through the night without listening for imaginary sounds. I learned that revenge didn't always look like shouting or breaking things. Sometimes it looked like refusing to disappear. One afternoon, while cleaning my room at Mrs. Parker's house, I found my notebook tucked into a drawer. I flipped through the pages slowly. The early entries felt distant now, like they belonged to another version of me. I added one more line at the end. I was heard. That felt important. My parents didn't go to jail. There were no headlines. No dramatic ending where everything snapped back into place. What they lost was quieter. And in some ways sharper. They lost the automatic trust that came with being my parents. They lost the ability to say they hadn't known, and I gained something I hadn't realized I could have. Control over my own story. When summer ended, I stood in front of the mirror tying my shoes for the first day of school and caught my own reflection. I looked older than I had a few months ago. Not because of what I'd been through, but because I'd survived it without pretending it was okay. Consequences, I realized, weren't just about punishment. They were about truth finally being strong enough to change what happened next. The day my parents came back from Europe, they expected stories. They expected to unpack souvenirs and complain about jet lag. They expected me to be waiting where they left me, quiet and grateful. Ready to slide back into the shape that made their lives easier. What they didn't expect was a house full of witnesses, a file thicker than their luggage, and a child who had learned how powerful the truth could be when it was written down and refused to disappear. Weeks after the hearing, life didn't magically become simple. I still woke up some mornings feeling like I'd done something wrong just by needing help. Old habits don't vanish overnight. But each day at Mrs. Parker's house chipped away at that fear. There was food without conditions. Attention without tests. Care that didn't have to be earned by acting older than I was. My parents kept sending messages. Sometimes they were careful and apologetic. Sometimes they sounded defensive, like they were still trying to explain themselves out of a corner they'd painted. I read them all. I didn't delete them, and I didn't answer most of them. That, too, felt like a choice I was finally allowed to make. During one supervised visit, my mother brought a small gift from Europe she'd never given me. A keychain shaped like a tower. "I got this for you," she said, her voice too hopeful. "I always meant to give it to you." I held it in my hand, feeling its weight. "I know," I said, and I did. Intentions had never been the problem. Afterward, the supervisor asked if I wanted to keep having visits. I thought about it carefully before answering. "Yes," I said. "But I don't want to pretend we're fine." "Not yet." She nodded. "That's fair." That was the thing my parents hadn't expected. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't about embarrassing them or tearing them down in front of the world. It was quieter and far more lasting. It was the moment they realized they couldn't rewrite what happened. That their version of the story didn't get to be the only one anymore. I kept my notebook. Even after everything was over. I didn't write in it every day, but I didn't throw it away either. It reminded me of who I was when no one was looking, and who I chose to become when someone finally was. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about that first day, the suitcase rolling away, the $20 bill in my hand, the word independent, tossed at me like a compliment that wasn't one. I wondered what would have happened if I'd stayed quiet. If I'd counted crumbs and waited, and tried to make myself smaller so no one would get upset. I knew the answer. They would have come home to a version of me who had learned the wrong lesson. That being loved meant not needing anything. That survival was something you did alone and silently. Instead, they came home to consequences. Not jail, Not headlines. Something more personal. They lost the comfort of denial. They lost the ability to say they didn't know. They lost the version of me who would have protected them by erasing himself. And I gained something better than revenge. I gained safety. I gained a voice. I gained the knowledge that telling the truth, even when it shakes everything, is sometimes the only way to stop being hurt by the same silence over and over again. One evening, months later, I stood at the window of Mrs. Parker's house, watching the street lights flicker on. The neighborhood looked the same as it always had. Kids riding bikes, parents calling them in for dinner. Normal lives continuing. But I wasn't the same. My mother once whispered, "No, this can't be happening." When she realized what she'd walked into after her trip, I understood now that she was wrong about one thing. It wasn't happening. It had already happened. From the moment she chose a plane ticket over her child and assumed I'd take care of the rest. If you were 12 years old and left alone with $20 and a promise instead of a plan, what would you do? Would you bury the story to keep the peace and protect the people who failed you? Or would you do what I did and let the truth become the one thing they could never outrun? That was the revenge they never expected. They thought revenge would look like anger. They thought I would scream, break things, refuse to speak to them, or try to punish them the way kids do when they don't know any other power. They prepared for tears, for tantrums, for silence that could eventually be smoothed over with gifts and apologies. What they didn't prepare for was distance. Not the physical kind. I still saw them during supervised visits, but the emotional distance that comes when someone finally understands their worth and refuses to bargain it away. That kind of distance doesn't announce itself. It just settles in and never leaves. Months passed. Life stabilized in ways I hadn't known were possible. I woke up knowing there would be food. I went to school knowing someone would notice if I didn't come home. I laughed more. Slept deeper. The fear that had lived permanently in my chest slowly loosened its grip. My parents, meanwhile, worked hard to show change. Parenting classes, counseling sessions, carefully worded apologies delivered in rooms with supervisors watching. On paper, they were doing everything right. But paper can't undo hunger. During one visit, my mother leaned forward and said softly, "We're trying so hard. Don't you see that?" I did see it. I also saw the difference between trying now and choosing then. "I see it," I said. "But trying after you're caught isn't the same as caring before someone gets hurt." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost felt guilty. That old reflex stirred, the instinct to protect her feelings at my own expense. But it passed. I had learned something important. Feeling guilty doesn't mean you're wrong. The real revenge wasn't watching them struggle. It wasn't seeing fear replace confidence in their eyes. It wasn't even the quiet shame they carried when other adults knew what they'd done. The revenge was that I no longer needed their approval to feel whole. They used to control the story. At family gatherings, my mother would laugh and say, "He's so independent. We barely worry about him." People smiled, impressed. No one asked what that independence cost. Now they couldn't tell that story anymore. Because the truth existed outside of them. In reports, in files, in testimonies, in my own steady voice. And every time they tried to soften it, there was documentation waiting to contradict them. One afternoon, after a supervised visit ended, my father stopped me at the door. His voice was quiet, tired. "Do you think," he asked, "that one day you'll forgive us?" I thought about it carefully. Forgiveness used to feel like something I owed people to keep them from leaving. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But forgiveness isn't the same as pretending nothing happened." He nodded slowly, like someone hearing a truth they couldn't argue with. That night, back at Mrs. Parker's house, I opened my old notebook for the first time in weeks. I flipped through the early pages, the shaky handwriting, the short entries about meals and fear and time stretching too long. That kid felt far away now, but not gone. Just integrated. I added one final entry. Day I stopped surviving and started choosing. I closed the notebook and didn't feel the urge to hide it anymore. The revenge wasn't loud. It didn't explode. It unfolded. It was the way I spoke without fear now. The way I asked for help without apologizing. The way I didn't rush to comfort the people who had once left me alone. It was the way my parents realized they couldn't rush me anymore. They couldn't demand closeness. They couldn't rewrite the past. They couldn't force trust back into existence. Trust, once broken, doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to time, and sometimes, it never fully returns. And that was the consequence they never expected. They thought leaving me behind would be something temporary. A month. A trip. A small decision with no lasting damage. What they didn't understand was that the moment they walked out that door, something permanent began. Not my suffering. My awakening. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't small. I wasn't waiting. And I didn't need revenge the way they understood it. Because the truth stood where anger never had to. And it was enough.